when you try to write the script for a short film, it's very difficult to write a short film. I think in some ways it's harder than for a feature to have a complete idea in just a few minutes.
When we hear people who have spent time on the inside talk about the dark side of Hollywood, it can often be very difficult to grasp the magnitude of things that happen when the camera goes off. It goes beyond the fancy things and larger-than-life persona that we see on screen. In this video, we have some of the most insane news to have ever come out of Hollywood, showing the very dark sides of some of your favorite celebrities. You will be shocked about what we have to say about Charlie Chaplin. Let's get right into it. 1. The reason for Mary Nolan's abdominal surgeries. Arguably one of the most important men in Hollywood during the early to mid-20th century, Eddie Mannix was the general manager and eventually vice president at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Famed for his work as a fixer, Mannix sought to ensure that the good public image, which the studio maintained, did not suffer because of scandals from its stars, and thereby salvage their careers along with the studio's reputation. One of the more controversial episodes in Mannix's career concerns his relationship with actress Mary Nolan and the after-effects of the scandal that resulted in her having abdominal surgeries and a resulting lawsuit. Mary Nolan was the rising star who transitioned in the 1920s from vaudeville to silent film. She drew much attention for both her beauty and her talent, but also had to fight many struggles in her career, including her personal demons, one of which was the tempestuous relationship she had with Mannix. It was during her years at MGM that Nolan began a romantic affair with Mannix, although much about what really happened in that relationship remains obscure. Mannix was married, but it is also well documented that he had numerous girlfriends outside of marriage, Nolan being one of many affairs. During the early 1930s, Nolan became pregnant, reportedly with Mannix's child. Abortion was against the law at that time and highly stigmatized, hence the procedures were usually done under unsafe conditions. Accounts state that Nolan had an abortion that went terribly wrong and left her with terrible complications. This resulted in several corrective abdominal surgeries to fix the damage, leaving her in chronic pain and unable to work for extended periods. This whole ordeal devastated her career, and she struggled to get back on her feet in Hollywood. Things went downhill for Nolan and Mannix from here. She felt he had left her alone at the time of her recovery and gave no monetary or emotional support. Feeling cheated and helpless, Nolan filed a suit against Mannix on the grounds of damages and injuries. It was claimed that Mannix forced her into the abortion and was further responsible for medical complications afterward. The case exploded in the media, further sullying Nolan's reputation. Mannix, the eternal troubleshooter, didn't let the situation explode. He supposedly utilized every ounce of his influence to moderate how negative all publicity around the case was, trying to discredit Nolan's claims. Finally, the case was settled out of court, under terms still kept secret. Whatever the case, the damage to Nolan's career was irreparable. She continued to act sporadically, but never again achieved the success she once knew. Her health problems continued, and she died aged 43 in 1948. Nolan's tragic story is, therefore, a pointer to the human cost of maintaining that gleaming facade of Hollywood. 2. Clark Gable and Loretta Young's scandal. Clark Gable and Loretta Young were involved in one of the most publicized scandals in Hollywood. It was a story of secrecy, denial, and a shocking revelation. Clark Gable and Loretta Young were huge stars during Hollywood's golden era, and to protect their career and public images, their illicit love affair resulted in a child being hidden from prying eyes. Only many years later was the truth known, after their daughter Judy Lewis revealed it in her biography. Their romance actually started on the set of The Call of the Wild, where both Gable and Young starred, back in 1935. At that time, Gable was a hotshot and was married to his second wife, Rhea Langham. Young was a strict Catholic and one of Hollywood's most glamorous leading ladies, unmarried, but with great concern about her reputation. The two began a brief but passionate affair during filming. When Young found herself pregnant, she was faced with a dilemma. Being a devoted Catholic, she believed in the sanctity of the unborn, and was opposed to abortion, but as a Hollywood star, she could not afford to be embroiled in the scandal. To conceal her pregnancy, Young went to great extremes. She spent several months in Europe, claiming to be on a much-needed rest. There she delivered a daughter, Judy, in November of 1935. Gable and Young contrived a story whereby Judy would be presented to the public as an adopted child when she arrived in the States. She said she had gotten the baby from a Catholic adoption agency, and even went as far as to stage an adoption ceremony to support the whole story. Her mother and several friends were also involved in the lie, which made it stick for some time. Clark Gable was not much involved in Judy's life either. He paid his shares of the baby's upkeep, but never acknowledged Judy as his daughter in public. Gable was known for his womanizing and had several affairs during the course of his career, but kept them in wraps to prevent scandals that could have tarnished his image. His marriage ended in 1939, after which Gable married Carol Lombard, until her death in a tragic plane crash in 1942. Meanwhile, all this time, Gable remained silent, and Young raised the child alone as her adopted child. Later in her life, Judy Lewis remembered growing up believing that she was an adopted child, but also somewhat out of place within Young's family. Young had 2 other children, and Judy was often overshadowed by her siblings. Young, who married producer Tom Lewis in 1940, didn't let the cat out of the bag to Judy until she was well into her early 30s. It wasn't until 1966 that Young finally revealed to Judy that Clark Gable was her biological father. In 1994, Judy Lewis wrote a memoir called Uncommon Knowledge, where she published for the first time the full story of her parentage and the large-scale cover-up orchestrated by her mother and Gable. The book sent shockwaves as it let out one of Hollywood's best-kept secrets. Lewis spoke of how she came to learn the truth and deal with her identity as the daughter of 2 Hollywood legends. She also candidly spoke of how the secrecy of her life affected her self-esteem and complicated the relationship she had with her mother. Loretta Young faced widespread criticism regarding her role in the deception. However, she maintained relative silence, refusing to talk publicly about the matter after Judy made her disclosures. Clark Gable, of course, who had died in 1960, never could answer to the accusations. The story of Clark Gable, Loretta Young, and Judy Lewis shows the pressures stars went through during Hollywood's studio era, where personal scandals could derail careers. It also underlines the human cost of this kind of secrecy, especially for Judy, who spent a great part of her life coming to terms with the truth about her parentage. She felt that speaking about this in Uncommon Knowledge brought some closure to her own life while shining a light on one of the more fascinating chapters of Hollywood history. 3. Patricia Douglas talks about the dark side of MGM. The Patricia Douglas MGM scandal really ranks among the most shocking, if not entirely tragic, on-record tales of exploitation and abuse against MGM hires during Hollywood's golden age. She was an ambitious young dancer and would-be actress who found herself at the center of a scandal that unearthed the sordid substructure of the studio system. It's a tale of the predatory behavior of powerful men and the extreme lengths to which studios like MGM would go in order to preserve their image. In 1937, Patricia Douglas was a 20-year-old dancer when she attended what she said was a casting call for a promotional film for MGM. However, it was a cover-up by the head of MGM, Louis B. Mayer, for a wild party attended by studio executives, salesmen, and other powerful figures. Later, Douglas would reveal that she, among several other young women, was invited under false pretense to some sort of party where they would be made drunk and then horribly abused. Such a heinous act clearly scarred her both in body and psyche. Douglas later filed a case against MGM on grounds of negligence and claimed damages for being assaulted. The case was one of the rare incidents in history where a woman from Hollywood was all set to speak against the big shots regarding charges of sexual harassment. At that time, even Douglas felt massive pressure. In a bid to protect its reputation, MGM launched a full-scale attack on her reputation. Studio lawyers and private investigators dug deep into her personal life, spreading rumors of an unreliable, promiscuous woman. Generally, most of the media were studio-owned, thus it either ignored the case or painted Douglas in a bad picture. Despite her bravery, Douglas's case was eventually dismissed. The judge ruled there was insufficient evidence to proceed, and the case faded from public view. Crushed by the outcome, Douglas retreated from public view, struggling for decades with the trauma of what had happened to her. Indeed, her story was all but forgotten, until an investigative work by David Sten brought it back into the public eye in the early 2000s. He himself interviewed Douglas about the full degree of the cover-up and what systemic abuse was like within the studio system, before her death in 2003. Perhaps the most damning evidence related to the studio was a letter that Sten had found between the media mogul William Randolph Hearst and Louis B. Mayer, telling Mayer to handle the situation discreetly. This above letter warned Mayer against allowing any public scandal that could sully the name of MGM. It underlined collusion at the highest levels between influential Hollywood and media to suppress stories about abuse and also to protect the interests of the studios. Also, the attempts at damage control also included the highly sophisticated character assassination campaign that was mounted against Douglas. Meanwhile, Mayer and his executives were working furiously behind the scenes, intimidating witnesses and suppressing evidence. Studio lawyers fought on technicalities of the law as a means of dragging the case out, hoping in this way it would eventually get thrown out altogether. The bravery that Douglas had demonstrated by stepping forward was matched by a stone wall of silence and denial, which had left her feeling alone and powerless. The Patricia Douglas scandal is another grim reminder of the exploitation and abuse so rife in Hollywood during the studio era. It puts into perspective systemic efforts at silencing the victims and shielding the powerful. Since then, Douglas's story, linked with Sten's investigation, has become a symbol in the fight for justice and accountability within the entertainment industry. Although Douglas herself did not live to see the full telling of her story, her bravery opened the floodgates for future generations of survivors to come forward, demanding changes and accountability of said abusers. 4. Charles Laughton's Sexual Preferences, Scotty Bowers' memoir, Full Service, My Adventures in Hollywood and the Secrets of the Stars, became a sensation when it was published in 2012 for exposing the hidden of many Hollywood celebrities of the Golden Age. Among the many scandals revealed in the book was the scandalous account involving Charles Laughton, the celebrated British actor who took leading roles in such classics as The Private Life of Henry VIII and Mutiny on the Bounty. Bowers was a hustler and procurer of partners for Hollywood's elite, and he claimed to have arranged some of Laughton's encounters, which would indicate that the actor had rather atypical sexual tastes. According to Bowers, Charles Laughton was a voyeur and liked to watch others having sex. Bowers described how he would set up encounters for Laughton in which he would watch young men having sex with each other. These encounters apparently occurred behind closed doors, as Laughton was very worried about protecting his public image. At the time, Laughton was married to the actress Elsa Lanchester, and though their marriage was reportedly unconventional, both presented a united front to the world. The former knew Laughton's sexual orientation, and none of these matters were spoken publicly for the sake of avoiding scandal. Bowers went on to say that Laughton was fascinated with sailors and working-class men, many times asking Bowers to find such individuals. These were encounters that were carefully staged to keep them out of the public eye. Allegedly, these tastes of Laughton's would have been taboo in the ultra-conservative mid-20th century Hollywood, such that any hint of it would immediately ruin a career. The revelations concerning Laughton in Full Service were fascinating and unbelievable. Some critics, duly noting both the passage of many years and the sensational nature of his claims, questioned the veracity of some of Bowers' accounts. However, others saw the book as a rare glimpse into the secret lives of Hollywood stars, exposing double standards and hypocrisy from an era that required public conformity while tolerating private indulgence. Charles Laughton was a brilliant actor and a great director, but Bauer's revelations brought some complication to his public persona. The resultant scandal brought up the pressures put on LGBTQ+ people in Hollywood during a time when being openly gay or bisexual wasn't an option. Bowers described the lengths to which people would go to express their secret via conduits like himself. While the scandal did little to tarnish Laughton's posthumous reputation, it helped to open a wider conversation about the secret histories lurking behind Hollywood's golden age. It was a book full of candid, sometimes shocking stories with which Bowers exploded the sanitized image of old Hollywood and laid bare all human complications under the glamour. The Laughton story, as related by Bowers, refers to people having to put up with living in the shadows while secretly indulging in forbidden desires. 5. Charlie Chaplin's taste for younger women. Charlie Chaplin is one of the most iconic figures in the history of the cinema, an undisputed genius as a comedian, filmmaker, and actor. The character The Tramp, which he played on screen, made him the darling of millions. However, Chaplin's personal life often stood in contrast to his public image. His taste for much younger girls would become one of the ongoing themes in his personal life. His first marriage in 1918 was to 16-year-old Mildred Harris, whom he met when she was 14 years old. Chaplin himself was 29. That marriage was brief and filled with tension, and finally ended in divorce in 1920. Later, Chaplin would say the marriage had been a mistake, as he had been pressured by a sense of obligation when Harris falsely claimed she was pregnant. In 1924, Chaplin married the 16-year-old Leda Gray, whom he had first met when she was 12 and cast in his film The Kid. By the time these two married, Gray was already pregnant with Chaplin's child. This relationship was well marked by enormous age and power imbalance. It was a stormy marriage that finally ended in a very public divorce in 1927, where Gray accused Chaplin of cruelty and infidelity during the marriage. The salacious details of their split involve claims of abuse and Chaplin asking for a paternity test, further damaging his reputation. His third marriage in 1936 was to actress Paulette Goddard, who by then was in her mid-20s. That marriage, too, ended in divorce in 1942. It was Chaplin's fourth marriage and most inflammatory. When he married an 18-year-old Una O'Neill in 1943 at age 54, he further rattled the public. She was the daughter of famous playwright Eugene O'Neill, and there was a jarring 36-year gap between her and the aging Chaplin. Despite all the initial criticism, the marriage proved to be long-lasting for Chaplin, with the couple staying together until Chaplin's death in 1977. Una stood by him through his later years, including during his exile from the United States in the 1950s amid political controversies. The public viewed Chaplin's marriages to underage girls with a great deal of discomfort and disapproval. On screen, Chaplin's Tramp epitomized innocence, charm, and a high degree of moral integrity, but it would appear that Chaplin lived quite opposite to these values in real life. Considering his position in Hollywood, many believed he had exploited those young women by having a relationship with a string of teenage girls. Further muddling his public standing were the extensions of his personal life into politicized controversies. He had accusations of communist sympathies in the 1940s and 1950s, further tarnishing his image. His failure to become a U.S. citizen, coupled with vocalization of his political views, led to his eventual exile from the United States in 1952. Marriages to younger women were not the sole contributing factors to the fall from grace, but it added to a wider perception of Chaplin as one who flouted convention. Despite all the scandals, Chaplin's artistic legacy is unrivaled. His film career, which produced classics like The Kid, City Lights, and Modern Times, continues to be celebrated for its innovation and emotional depth, while his personal life was quite another affair. It's a reminder of how impossible it seems to divorce an artist's work from his behavior, and how public figures are judged by the mores of their time and by the timeless mores of morality and accountability. Which of these revelations shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments and we will see you in the next one.